It's a misfortune that we were not alive when it was in full glory. It must have been the most phenomenal place for it to draw people from across the world. Gautama came here to give his first teaching. The Chinese traveler who came after Gautama, he says, Nalanda University is just a small drop of knowledge that fell out of Kashi. Even today, it's in common language, but they may not know what's behind this. They say Kashi is not on the ground, it is on Shiva's Trishul up there. Because they created a physical structure which in turn generated an energy structure, and the energy structure is not on the ground, it is above. The legend of Kashi 100% goes by the fundamental that he himself lived here. This is his winter place. It's a misfortune that we were not alive when it was in full glory. It must have been the most phenomenal place for it to draw people from across the world. People have been traveling here from across the world for thousands of years. Gautama came here to give his first teaching. The Chinese traveler who came after Gautama, he says, Nalanda University is just a small drop of knowledge that fell out of Kashi. And Nalanda University has still been recognized as the greatest place of learning, not only of those times, they say even in today's world, you cannot compare another university with this. There were 30,000 monks studying in Nalanda and over 10,000 faculty, all kinds of subjects, every kind, Eastern, Western, every kind of subject. Mathematics reached its highest peak. All the people that you hear of, Aryabhatas and so many others, they all came from this region, all generated by the culture that was alive in Kashi. This level of intelligence and human competence came because of this instrument which allowed them to make contact with dimensions which are not usually available to a human being. It is not something that they logically thought up. They saw the existence the way it is. By seeing the nature of the creation, human intelligence matured in ways that nobody had ever imagined possible. Even today, it's in common language, but they may not know what's behind this. They say Kashi is not on the ground, it is on Shiva's Trishul up there. Because they created a physical structure which in turn generated an energy structure, and the energy structure is not on the ground, it is above. So because of this, they said, Kashi is not on the earth, it is above the earth. So it's because of that this whole tradition came up. If you go to Kashi, that is it. You don't want to leave the place, because when you get connected to the cosmic nature, why would you want to go anywhere else?
Sadhguru, the first thing you notice when you enter Kashi is the number of temples. There are many, many, many temples here, so many of them. Why have so many temples? Is it that this is a place for many gods? You primarily hear about this being the place which belongs to Lord Shiva. But what about other temples? There are so many other temples here. It would be great to know more about that.
According to iconographic proof, the oldest piece of iconography or a coin which depicts Shiva is about 12,400 years old, where Shiva is sitting in Siddhasana like this and with a bull next to him. 12,400 years ago, if they had to make a coin, by then he was already an icon. That means maybe there are a few thousand years before that. The legend of Kashi 100% goes by the fundamental that he himself lived here. This is his winter place. He lived as an ascetic in the upper regions of Himalayas. He liked it there. He didn't mind the cold. If it got too cold, he smeared himself with ash from the cremation grounds and that kept him going. But when he got married to a princess, compromises have to be made. And being a graceful man, he decided he will move to the plains. As this was the most fabulously built city of the time, naturally he decided his new bride and him should move to Kashi and no other place. And he moved to Kashi. He said, "This is it, this is my abode." And he himself took the effort to consecrate the space into a powerful field of energy which still lives. There's a beautiful story. Shiva himself left Kashi because of some political reasons. Yes. There was a king called Divodasa. Divodasa became a phenomenal king. So, because the gods were afraid that Kashi may lose its reverberance if it's not properly managed, so they asked him to become the king. But he put a condition that if I have to be the king, Shiva has to leave the place. Because anyway people will go after him, I will sit in the palace, what kind of king am I? Shiva has to leave. So Shiva along with Parvati left to Mount Mandala. He went there and he could not stay. He wanted to come back to Kashi, but there's a political condition that he cannot come back to Kashi. So he said, "Get this Divodasa out, I want to go." So he sent 64 yoginis. He said, "Somehow corrupt the king. Once we find some fault in him, we can send him packing and I'll come back." They came here, they entrenched themselves all over the society, wanting to corrupt the society, but they loved the place so much, they forgot the mission. They didn't go back. Then he sent Surya Deva. He came here, he loved the place so much. People, all the Aditya temples are for him. He came and he loved it so much and he didn't go back. Then he sent Brahma. Brahma himself came and he loved it and he didn't go back. Then he said, "I cannot trust any of these people." And he sent his own ganas. They cannot forget Shiva, they are his people, but they loved the place so much. They thought, this is the only place Shiva should live, not Mount Mandara. And they became Dwarapalakas of this city. They said, anyway he has to come, there's no point we going back. Then Divodasa was tempted with mukti. He did not fall for any kind of other things they created, corruptions. He was incorruptible, but he was tempted with mukti and he took it. Then Shiva came back. So, there's a temple called Avimukteshwara because Shiva promised he will never leave Kashi. Whatever happens, I will not leave Kashi. So these are all stories to tell you how much they long to be here, not because of pleasures, because of the possibility that the city offered. Because the city was not just a dwelling place, it was a mechanism to go beyond all limitations. It was a mechanism for this tiny little organism to connect with the larger organism of the cosmos.
The 8 Kal Bhairava temples are located in 8 cardinal directions of Kashi, protecting the whole mandala. These are Unmat Bhairava, Krodhana Bhairava, Kapala Bhairava, Asitanga Bhairava, Chanda Bhairava, Ruru Bhairava, Bhishana Bhairava and Samhara Bhairava. In the Kashi Khanda Purana, the Kashi Kshetra is said to be standing upon Shiva's Trishul, and 3 main temples form the 3 points of the trident. These three main temples act as the fulcrum for the mandala. They are Omkareshwara in the north, Vishveshwara in the middle, and Kedareshwara in the south. Each temple forms their own khanda or sphere of influence. Along the 8 directions, 56 Ganesha temples have been established in 7 concentric circles. Their walk of devotion to visit these 56 shrines takes the pilgrims in a natural clockwise spiral that ends at the Kashi Vishwanath temple. There are also 64 Yogini temples, 12 sun temples, 9 temples for Navdurgas, 9 Chandi temples, and many others which form the 468 major shrines of Kashi. The 12 Aditya or sun temples are also located in accordance with the transition of the sun through half of the year from Dakshinayana to Uttarayana. The Panch Kroshi Yatra is one of the most significant Padyatras done by pilgrims around the sacred Kashi Mandala. Along this route, there are 108 shrines to which pilgrims travel by foot. There are 5 major villages where pilgrims can rest and even stay overnight. Even today, gold trees built by kings a few hundred years ago are still intact. As one travels in a clockwise direction on the Panch Kroshi route, all the temples are located on the right side of the road, marking the outer limit of the Panch Kroshi sphere. The Panch Kroshi Yatra begins with a dip in the river Ganga at Manikarnika Ghat. The first major temple on this route is the Adi Karmadheshwar temple. The linga here was consecrated by sage Karmadheshwar. In the Kashi Khanda Purana, it is said that Yakshas and Ganas always lived on the trees and near water bodies. On this route, their shrines have also been placed in the same way. The second temple on the route is the Bhim Chandi Mandir.
Bhim Chandi Mahadevi Sarvarachas Bhakshini Muni Tran Kare Devi Namaste Stu.
This Durga temple is said to have been established by the Gandharva who worshipped Devi here. She is said to protect all devotees who seek her grace as her own child, blessing them with health and well-being. The third is Dehali Vinayak temple. This temple is directly in line with the Kashi Vishwanath temple, marking the halfway mark of the yatra. It is said that before entering Kashi, Lord Rama meditated here. The fourth is the Rameshwaram temple. This temple is said to be a replica of the Rameshwaram temple in the south. It is situated on the banks of the river Varuna and marks the northernmost point of the yatra. It says in the scriptures that all the lingas of the Kashi Mandala fall under 42 kinds. In the Kapildhara temple, all 42 kinds are there in a single form. The Pasupani Vinayaka and Kapilidhara temples mark the end of the Panchkroshi Yatra.
Maha